Hello everybody, my name is Ryan Craig. The purpose of this webinar is to give you a quick walk around of FME Desktop and FME Server. This will take approximately 40 minutes. Feel free to type in any questions as we go along. You may have noticed that in the GoToWebinar control panel, there's a questions panel. If you type in any questions there, I'll be able to see them and either answer them during the talk or after the talk, or if they're an especially difficult question, I'll have to email you back later on. We have you muted right now because with this many people, phone noise is an issue. So when I'm finished, I'll then answer any specific questions that were not answered during the demonstration. Once upon a time, I was a pilot. On the day that I started my flight training, before I learned any theory, my instructor took me on a walk around of the airplane. This is a methodical pre-flight check that must be done before any flight. What I found was that I easily remembered the walk around because it went in a specific order, starting at the pilot's door and working around the aircraft counterclockwise. I'm going to try to do something similar when demonstrating the products that Safe Software offers. FME Desktop is our primary product. It allows you to inspect data, author translation scripts, and run those translation scripts. FME Desktop is also the authoring environment for FME Server. FME Server allows people to run FME translation scripts from a web page without having FME Desktop installed on their own computer. It can also do a lot more, but we'll leave it at that for now. There are two primary components of FME Desktop, and those are the FME Universal Viewer and FME Workbench. FME Workbench is used to author translation scripts, and the FME Universal Viewer is used to inspect data. For this demonstration, I'll be loading CAD data into a GIS. Specifically, I'll be loading AutoCAD DWG files into SQL Server Spatial. Before we create a translation script, it's important to inspect the source data. To do this, we use the FME Universal Viewer. Like most good cooking shows, I've started up already because it takes about 30 seconds for it to start. Let's put a file, and we'll open a data set. This will pop up the standard FME format selection tool. So in this tool, we have a drop-down list. This will contain the 10 most recent formats that I've worked with. If you've just installed FME, there won't be any formats listed here. If we click the three-dot button, the ellipsis button, it'll bring up the Formats gallery. This lists all the formats supported by FME. Now you'll note that some formats are grayed out. There's two reasons a format may be grayed out. Either you do not have a sufficient license for it, or there's some additional helper application that has to be installed in order for FME to read or write a specific format. Now, the license which I'm using for this one covers pretty much everything, but you'll notice that some formats are still grayed out. For example, the Esri geodatabase formats. If I double-click on one of those, it'll tell me the reason why it's grayed out. It'll either tell me that I need a better license, or an additional license, or in this case that I have unmet dependencies. In order to read or write geodatabase formats, you have to have Esri ArcGIS installed and licensed on the same computer that FME is installed on. There's a search down here, so I can search for DWG. Here's all the formats that have DWG in either the name or the description. You can also select formats by simply clicking into this box and starting to type, and it will filter down through the formats. The data set is the location of the data. You can get to that by using the three-dot button here. My data is kept in FME data, demo data, parcel data, and I have an area of interest. This option works if you want to choose one or more files that are within the same folder. If you want to have a bit more control over the files that you select, you can click this plus button here, the Advanced Browser. This allows me to add many files from separate folders or add an entire directory of files. You can see that it simply uses a wildcard. You can also have it search through subdirectories too. There are typically parameters which will affect how data is read in. For example, this data could be grouped by layer names, by geometry, or attribute schema. Attribute schema with AutoCAD files simply means that there's extended entity data. The parameters for formats are typically different from each other, but reflecting the peculiarities of the particular format. I can tag this data as having a specific coordinate system if it's not coordinate system aware. It's important to note that when we open data in the Universal Viewer, it does not perform a coordinate system conversion. The data is simply shown with the coordinates that the geometry has. So if you're trying to show data in, say, NAD 83 Zone 10, but also trying to show data in lat long, they will not show up overlapping. So here's the data. So let's review what we have in the Universal Viewer here. Starting at the top, the file menus, I can open an additional data set. This will open an additional data set in a new tab. If I want to add data to the existing tab, I can select Add Data Set. Save Data As will do a quick translation out to any format of my choice of what's visible in my view window. This is useful for creating little subsets of data for test translations. I can also close my current tab. A view space is basically like a project file. It's a way that FME Universal Viewer can remember what you've opened up in the various tabs, what layers you've turned on, what styling you've applied, etc. So if you've set up a couple of views, you can save that as a view space, and then you can open that up later on. We can also print your current view. It's not recommended that you use the Universal Viewer to create cartographic output. This is primarily a debugging tool. If you want to create pretty output, that's what something like ArcMap is for. You can also open up previously opened files. Under the View window, or View menu, there's windows that you can turn on or off, such as the Log window. It tells you basically what FME is doing in the background when it displays data. There's also a number of options. You can turn on or off area filling, displaying all coordinates, full decimal precision, and various vertice types. The refresh button will actually reread the data. This can be helpful because the view of the data is not a live view. It's simply a snapshot. If the underlying data should change or someone should edit it, you will not see those changes reflected in this view until you refresh the data. Now, the most commonly used menu items are also available here as icons: open data, add a data set, save the data as, open a view space, save a view space, close view space, and refresh. And also the standard GIS type navigation tools. I have an eye tool here that allows me to select features. I can measure distances. You'll notice that the measured distance shows up down here. The measured distance will be in the working units of whatever your coordinate system happens to be in. I can zoom in, zoom out, pan around. If I have a selected feature, I can zoom to that selected feature. If I have a marked location, which I can mark using this, I can zoom to a marked location. Zoom extend, zoom previous, adding that marked location, and some advanced things for querying features. So on the left-hand side here, I have my view space control. I can turn on or off my entire view, specific data sets, and also specific layers. If I want to change the colors of a layer, I'll just click on its icon, and I can select a new color. If I have features selected over in the information window here, I'll see the total number of features I have selected, and I can scroll through them. As I select features, they'll flash briefly on the canvas. We also have them listed by feature type. That's basically the layer name, so I can see I have a lot of parcels and a couple of labels. I have coordinate system information here. If your data is coordinate system aware, it'll list its coordinate system here. If I click on the three-dot button, I can see how it is defined within FME. Underneath that, I have all the attributes for this data. I have the attribute names and the attribute values, and if I right-click on this, I can choose to copy them to the clipboard. Now, this data doesn't actually have any user-defined data. All the attributes that you see here are what we call format attributes. These are attributes that FME creates itself based on properties of the feature, such as its color, layer names, etc. Beneath that, we have the coordinate information. These are the actual coordinates of this feature. The first coordinate, the second coordinate. It's a 3D feature, but we can see that there's no Z values for this. If you double click on a coordinate that's listed, it'll mark that location. And then you can zoom into that marked location. So you can see that this is a fairly short line going from there to there. So this is the data that we have. We can see that we have lines outlining the parcels. And in the middle of that, we have a text label indicating the parcel ID. In order to load this successfully into a GIS, we'll have to create polygons from these lines and then attach that text label, that ID, that parcel ID, to the newly created parcel. And then we may also want to retrieve additional attributes from an external database. To do all this, we'll use the FME Workbench. So when you start up FME Workbench, this is how it looks. We'll start in the middle section here, work our way around, and then we'll work our way around the outer section. So when you first start up FME, you have the Start tab and the Main tab. The Main tab is your actual translation script. The Start tab can give you some starting points to basically jumpstart your Main tab. So we can start with a blank workspace, which is basically the same as just clicking on the Main tab there. We can create a workspace. If I click Create a Workspace, it gives me a bunch of shortcuts. I can create a new blank workspace. I can generate a workspace, basically brings up a dialog to let me select a source and a destination format. or I can use a wizard to, again, let me select a source and a destination format. Most people start by generating a workspace. Because that's the most common option, you'll also notice that it's available out here directly, Generate Workspace. New for FME 2011, we have the concept of templates. You can create templates yourself. Basically, it's a starting point workspace. Or we've also installed a number of templates when you install FME. And they're grouped into various categories. These are some CAD to GIS specific templates, converting text into attributes, symbolizing CAD data, things specific for FME Server, dealing with raster data, reprojection issues, and some transformations. On our FMEpedia site, we're also adding additional templates, and you can refresh this view from time to time. So as we add additional templates, they'll be immediately available to you. We have some database templates, things for dealing with KML for Google Earth. New for FME 2011 is LiDAR support, so here's some LiDAR-specific workspaces. More raster workspaces, workspaces from our tutorials, transformations, such as converting X and Y attributes to an actual point, and various advanced workspace authoring, such as dealing with Python scripts within your workspace. I'll come back around to Generate Workspace in just a moment here. I'm just going to continue around the Start tab. You can also open up an existing workspace. Your most recently used workspaces will be listed here. In the main view here, we have some tabs. It tells you what's coming up with FME, if we have any upcoming webinars, trade shows, releases of the software, things like that. Those will be listed here. Things from our Twitter feed, an FME tip, which changes day to day, a link to FME User Central, and the learning library that we have. User Central is a useful link. Let's click on that. It brings up this community page here. There's two links here which are the most important, FMEpedia and FME Talk. FMEpedia is basically our wiki. There's a lot of information on FMEpedia, a lot of articles. There we go. Information about specific transformers, a lot of examples about using FME Server in practice, things like that. Very useful page. Another useful page is FME Talk. This is our discussion group. If you have a how do I do something type question, this is an excellent resource. Most of our product support staff, many of our developers, the president or vice president of the company, a lot of our resellers, and a lot of very knowledgeable users all hang out here. We also have a link to contact support and a link to our training materials. If it'll load. Looks like the training materials one is a little down today, but you'll also find that under safe.com/learning. So under learning, you can see our various tutorials. Down at the bottom here, you'll also find a link to webinars. This has links to upcoming webinars and also past recorded webinars, such as the webinar that you're watching now, and a lot of other really useful webinars. If you're dealing with anything database related, I highly recommend that you go through here and take a look at the SQL Server or SQL Server webinars or the geodatabase webinars. FME's representation of databases is fairly generic, so watching even webinars intended for different databases will give you hints as to how to use FME with your specific database. Okay, so that's the Start panel. Let's click on Generate Workspace. So again, this brings up the Format Selection dialog. I'm going to read in a DWG file, select my data set, check my parameters. I've already seen from the Universal Viewer that my data is coordinate system aware, so I don't have to set the coordinate system. If I wasn't going to be doing a coordinate system conversion, I wouldn't have to set it anyways. For the writer, I'm going to go to SQL Server. Check my parameters. You'll notice that these are all pre-populated. That's because earlier I set everything which I wanted and then clicked on the defaults button and then saved that as my defaults. Now there's an option down here to import feature type definitions. First of all, I'm going to generate this workspace and then I'll talk about that option. We also have options here for static schema or dynamic schema. These are fairly advanced options. Generally speaking, you'll want to use a static schema. So I'll click OK. FME is not currently doing a translation, simply reading in the source data, seeing what layers are available within that source data, so I can choose which ones I actually want in my initial translation script, and then creating the initial translation script. It's taken the source layer definitions and created matching destination layer definitions. Basically, if I ran the translation as is, it would create a parcels table and a labels table. Now, if you're writing out to a database, there's a pretty good chance that the tables you want to write out to already exist. So I'm just going to go back to the Start tab here, generate the workspace. And now I'll use a different option called Import Feature Type Definitions. Now when I create the workspace, instead of automatically creating destination layers or destination tables based on my source layer definitions, it will ask me if I have an existing definition I would like to use. So it's Import Writer Feature Types. It doesn't have to be from the same format that I'm writing out to. It could be an XML file that simply has the schema that I want to write out to. I'll go to the parameters, table list, and I'm going to write out to a parcel table. So now I have a slightly different starting workspace. This is what I have, and this is what I want. Okay. I'm just going to add a transformer here really quickly so I can talk about it later on. So this is our initial workspace. We have a couple of windows here. We have a Navigator window, which has all the parameters of everything that is in your translation. A transformer gallery. This is a gallery of all the transformation tools, such as this one that I see here. A log window, which tells us what's happening in FME during a translation. A transformer description window, which will give you help on any transformer that you select, either in the canvas or in the transformer gallery. Then we have the canvas itself, where we actually sketch out or lay out our data flow for this particular translation. We have a toolbar and, of course, all the menu items as well. So starting with the menu bar, we have File. We can create new workspaces, open existing workspaces. Later on, we can publish this workspace to our other product, FME Server, or download an existing workspace from FME Server. We can save this workspace. Always a good idea to save your workspace. By default, it'll save it into the My Documents, My FME Workspaces folder, and the name of it will be the name of the reader to the name of the writer, but you can call it anything that you like. We could also save this as a template if we wanted to give it to other people. We can run the translation if we're done with it. We can prompt and run, so it'll ask us for any special published parameters that we have. And if we wanted to do this as a batch translation, we can do a batch deploy as well. Now, someone had a quick question of what's the difference between create workspace and generate workspace. Create workspace just brings up a larger dialog allowing you to select how you want to create the workspace. Generate workspace brings up the file selection dialog, the dialog that we use to create the workspace. So ultimately, generate workspace is simply a subset of create workspace. Okay, so that's the file menu, edit. We can undo stuff. Control Z is often handy to have your hand on. Whenever I make a mistake, I can quickly undo it by hitting Control Z. Under the view, we have a number of additional windows. By default, the checked windows here are visible. There's also some additional windows which can be helpful, such as the overview window. If you have a large workspace, it'll show you your entire workspace. There's also a Feature Connections tab. This window allows me to connect items, and I'll try to demonstrate that later on. The final window is the Attribute Connections window. In my opinion, that's pretty much useless. Don't bother ever looking at it. We have grid options for the background. You can snap your transformers to a grid, add page breaks if you're going to be printing this, expand everything, collapse everything, and whether or not you want to see annotations, summary annotations, or bookmarks. I'll talk about those later on. You can also change your zoom. So we can zoom in, zoom out. You can also double-click with your middle mouse button on the canvas, and that'll bring you back to 100% zoom. We can insert things, constants, parameter references. Those are advanced concepts. Things that you may want to bring in, annotation. You can also add an annotation to a transformer by right-clicking on it and selecting Attach Annotation. Generally speaking, when you add annotation, you wouldn't want to simply describe what the transformer does. This is not a particularly helpful annotation. You'd want to indicate why you're actually extracting the text value. Visualizers are a special transformer. Anything which goes through a visualizer will be sent directly to the universal viewer. Bookmarks allow you to organize your workspace. For example, I can bring this over here. I'll call this my sources. So those are the useful things that you can insert. We can also add additional readers. I can import new feature types from a new data set. I can update existing feature types. If the layer definitions have changed, I can update those layer definitions. I can also enable or disable feature types. If I don't want them to be translated in this particular translation run, I can enable or disable them. You can also enable or disable entire readers or writers by right-clicking on the reader or writer in the Navigator. You can also remove transformers. You can also add additional writers. additional writer feature types, import feature type definitions from an existing data set. For example, if I hadn't added my parcel feature type, I could import that from my database. Update feature types, again, if something's changed for your feature type definition, you can read in a new feature type definition. A really useful option here is redirect to visualizer. When you're doing translations, you might not want to actually write out the data just yet. You'll want to inspect what you have. This is especially true when dealing with databases. If I'm writing data out to my database, I'm basically, while I'm testing the data set or testing my translation, I'm writing garbage out into my tables. To avoid doing that, I can turn on the redirect to visualizer. So that's checked. Now if I had run a translation, instead of writing out to the table, it will send the translation output directly to the universal viewer. Okay, I'll come back to the rest of these menu items after I work my way around here. The most commonly used menu items are down below it here as the icons. I can create a new workspace, open a workspace, save my workspace. I can run my translation. I can prompt and run for my translation. If I do a prompt and run, I have what are called published parameters, and it'll ask me for new values for my published parameters. Something new for FME 2011 is run translation with inspection. I can add inspection points. And then when I run the translation, I'll see data from those inspection points. So this is the first feature that came through. And I can continue on to the next inspection point. I can step this through to the next connection to see what it looks like as it proceeds through the workspace. Or I can simply run the rest of the translation through to completion. Because I had the redirect to visualizer turned on, it sent all the output to the universal viewer. Here we can see the effect of my text property extractor. It stored the text string as an attribute, text string. So there's a bunch of other menu options here. I'll come back to those as we work our way around. If you right-click, you can also customize the toolbar and add or remove any icons that you like. So beneath this toolbar, we have the Navigator window. Navigator window contains all of the parameters for your readers, your writers, the transformers and the canvas, any inspection points that you may have, bookmarks you may have added, a parameter list here for your published parameters. These are specially flagged parameters, which you'll be prompted for new values from or for when you click the prompt and run. Workspace resources, this is an advanced topic for FME Server, and the workspace properties. So let's take a quick look at some of these options here. For your readers, we can set our source coordinate system. This will tag the data as having a specific coordinate system. As we saw in the universal viewer, our data is coordinate system aware, so it's not necessary to set this. We can change the location of our source data if we so desire. So double click on this. If I don't want to read in that AutoCAD file, I can read in a different AutoCAD file. And various parameters for how this AutoCAD data is read in. There's also some advanced parameters, such as what layers do I actually want to read from, etc. Beneath that, it lists all the feature types in this data set, such as labels and parcels. You'll notice that when I click on anything in the Navigator, what I'm clicking on here will snap the focus in the canvas. This makes it quick and easy to find specific layers or transformers in a very large workspace. You can also expand this, see any parameters which there are, as well as an attribute list. And it's the same thing for the writer. I could set a coordinate system, change the connection parameters for my SQL Server database. Under Advanced, there's a fan out option. I could actually automatically send data to a different data set based on an attribute value if necessary. Doesn't make much sense to use with a database, but this can be really handy when writing out to, say, shape files or AutoCAD files. Again, I have my feature types. There's my parcel table. And within this, I can also see all the various parameters specific to this table, such as should I drop the table, truncate the table, the writer mode, which can be insert, update, or delete, etc. As well as all the attributes on this particular table, which I can see here. Beneath the readers and the writers is the transformers list. This will list all the transformers which are currently on my canvas. Again, when I select the transformer, it'll snap to focus in the canvas. And I can see the various parameters within that transformer as well. If I wanted to make one of these a published parameter, I can just right-click on it and create a parameter. And that parameter will be added to the published parameters list here, and then will be available to me when I do a prompt and run. I have my inspection points. If I want to get rid of them, I can just right-click and remove that inspection point. Beneath that, I have bookmarks. This lists all the bookmarks within my workspace. As we saw before, we can just right-click, and actually it's not there, it's up here, this option right here. That'll insert a bookmark, or we can go up to Insert and insert a bookmark. Bookmarks are very useful, makes it very easy to organize your workspaces. We have our published parameters. If we don't want a particular parameter published anymore, we can right-click on it and delete it. It doesn't delete the parameter, it simply deletes the published parameter. After that, we have the workspace properties, the workspace title and description. These are useful if you're going to be publishing this workspace to FME Server. The log file location. By default, whenever you run a translation, the log file for that translation is saved in the same folder as the workspace with the same name, just .log. If you want to save it somewhere else, you can just change it here. Source redirect, destination redirect, terminator redirect. These are somewhat advanced topics with the exception of the destination redirect. Here you'll notice that it says redirect to visualizer. It's the same option that I had here. It simply sends all the output from this translation directly to the universal viewer. There's also some advanced parameters. The only ones in here which I ever use, I can change the reprojection engine. If I have ArcGIS installed, I can use the Esri reprojection engine. I don't, so it's not available. I can password protect this workspace. Your workspace basically is your source code. When you hand this out to someone, if you're doing consulting work or something along those lines, they'll be able to see all the amazing logic that you went through to create your translation. If you want to hide that, you can password protect your translation. The translation can still be run by FME. People simply won't be able to open it up and take a look at it unless they have the password. Okay, we also have the startup and shutdown Python scripts and TCL scripts. Just a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Python? You just raise your hand in GoToWebinar. Yeah, a fair number of you. How many of you are familiar with TCL or Tickle? Very few of you. That's pretty much what I expected. If you're familiar with those scripting languages, you can specify to FME that a script should run before or after a translation. An example of why you may want to do this, you can use a Python script to retrieve data from an FTP site, save it to your local computer, unzip the data into various folders, and then you can run the workspace to translate the data. Once the translation is done, you can use a shutdown Python script to zip that data back up and then upload it back to an FTP site. Finally, in the Navigator, we have the Workspace search. This will allow you to quickly find anything within your workspace, depending on what you're searching for. Say text. So these are all the transformers, annotations, parameters, etc. with the word text in it. Okay, beneath the Navigator window is the Transformer Gallery. This contains all of the transformation tools that are available within FME. Transformers can either restructure geometry, restructure attributes, or redirect features based on some property of a feature. It's broken into many categories. We have all and then individual categories. So the all category lists everything alphabetically. There's a large number of transformers, as you can see. So it's often helpful to look for them in specific categories. If you want to deal with coordinate systems, here's all the coordinate system handling transformers. If you want to deal with databases, here's all the database handling transformers. For example, I know that my data has additional attributes stored in an external database, so I'd use a joiner transformer to retrieve those additional attributes. When you find the transformer that you want, you can either just double-click on it or drag and drop it into the canvas. So we also have categories for dealing with KML, dealing with network analysis, point clouds, rasters, etc. There's also a search option. This allows you to search for specific things. For example, I also want to build some areas. That doesn't bring up anything. That really just shows that this is not the most powerful search in the world. It's certainly not Google. Generally speaking, think of one, maybe two words that describe what you're trying to do, and then search for that. So I have an area builder transformer. I'll bring that in. Once you've added your transformer to your canvas, you can then connect it up by just hovering your mouse over an output port here, clicking on it, and then clicking where you want to connect it to. So this will build all my areas here. If I wanted to see what that would do, I can right-click on my transformer and connect visualizers. You can also right-click on particular output ports and connect visualizers as well. These will add these two special transformers here. These are the visualizer transformers. Now when I run the translation, any features that go to those visualizers will also be shown in the universal viewer. So here I can see I have all of my text output, but I also have my parcel output. You'll notice that each time I run a translation, the view is in a new tab. So here's my first tab, my second tab. So I have my overview window here. I'll close that because I don't need it. Moving over to the log window, it's giving me all the information about my previous translation run, telling me that all the output was redirected to the universal viewer. Translation was successful. There's a couple of warnings. Sometimes it's useful to take a look at warnings. We'll find them in the translation somewhere in there. I'd have to look a bit more closely. Oh wait, the 5 warnings are actually just these that I redirected to the universal viewer. There's also helpful information here. This is the command line to run this workspace, well, from the command line. If I wanted to run this from a batch file or from the DOS prompt or something like that, it's just FME, the name of the workspace. Any published parameters I have, I can add in as an optional parameter. In this case, it's my source data set. This can be really handy if you put this into a batch file. You can then point to that batch file with the Windows Task Scheduler and then have this translation run at scheduled times. A lot of our customers do that. The little workspace which starts up at midnight runs through a bunch of translations, and then they have freshly translated data in the morning. Clean this up a little bit. So you can also see that we have the transformer description option down here as well, and I also added the feature type connections tab. This can be handy if you're trying to connect things which are really distant in your workspace. I can choose an output port, for example, my area builder, and I'll want to connect that into something, such as my joiner, and I can connect them. Okay, so back to my canvas here, I'm going to need some additional transformers. We also have an option for what's called the quick add. Once you're familiar with transformers, you'll just start typing on the canvas. I've brought in my area builder. I want a point on area overlayer. My text features will go here. And my joiner will go out to the destination. Notice that there's a lot of color coding here, a lot of reds and yellows. The reds here are indicating that I don't actually have any attributes which match what I have in my destination. I also have reds and yellows for my transformers, meaning that I haven't looked at any of my actual parameters for them, such as my area builder. Once I hit OK, notice I go from yellow to blue. Yellow means that there's default values which are being used. I could actually run the translation without ever looking in the transformer and it would work. Red means that there's parameters within this workspace or parameters within this transformer which have to be set before the translation can be run. So my joiner transformer here. Some of the more complex transformers have a wizard to guide you through its configuration. So I'm going to take my parcel IDs from the database, match that up to my text strings. I'm going to bring in some additional attributes from my Access database and various other options there. So you can see that most of these attributes are now being properly mapped. So once I'm happy with this output, let's see, is there anything else I want to talk about here? Oh yes, destination parameters. Here I can change the output name of my table. I can change attribute names. And I can also change any parameters for this particular database table, such as dropping the table when I run the translation. Once I'm happy with the output, let me just run it here. So this is still redirecting to the universal viewer, so I can inspect the data first. Here's my output. I now have polygons, and those polygons have attributes. Once I'm happy with that, I can turn off the redirect to visualizer and run the translation. Now it will actually load it into my SQL Server database. So while it's doing that, let's take a look at some of these other options here. So I can download or upload this to FME Server. I can launch my FME Universal Viewer. I can use my auto layout. If things are getting messy, you can auto layout your transformers. If you have used bookmark, do not ever use this auto layout again. The auto layout's not aware of bookmarks and it'll pull things out of your bookmarks. I can add additional bookmarks or add annotation. Get into the habit of adding bookmarks and annotation. That's really your comments for your code. And uncommented code is a pain for other people to figure out. It can also be handy for you to indicate the logic for your transformer choices. If you have to come back to a workspace after a year, sometimes it can be difficult to figure out just what it was you were trying to accomplish. I know I've ended up in that situation. We can also add readers and add writers here. Under the help, there's numerous helpful documents. The FME transformers list, very handy. This is sort of how I learned to use the product. Just went into the All Workbench Transformers, and just went through each and every transformer. At some point in time, I do recommend, if you're going to use FME Workbench, to at least skim through the names of all the transformers. The names of the transformers are fairly descriptive. Any transformer that applies to what you're trying to accomplish should jump out at you. You'll also notice that any transformer which is new for the current release has a star beside it. So once you've skimmed through the list once, when FME 2012 comes out, you don't have to read through every single one of them. Just look for the ones that have stars. Also under the help, readers and writers reference. For whatever formats you're going to be dealing with, at least skim through its overview and feature representation. If you have time, skim through all of it. Under coordinate systems, if you're looking to create a custom coordinate system, you can find information about it there. You'll also find links under the help to our support and training, FME User Central, a way of contacting safe support if something's going wrong with your workspace, things are failing, and you're not sure why, let us know. You can also check for updates, and under About Workbench, it'll tell you useful things like the kind of license that you have. In this case, it's a Small World Edition. It's a floating license as opposed to a fixed license. Under more info, I can see the name of my license server and how many licenses I have available. Okay, continuing on through the menu items here. Tools, I can remove unattached transformers, purge temporary files, auto layout. New for FME 2011, if you're using a floating license server, is license borrowing. If I click on this, I have the option to borrow a license for up to 7 days. There's also FME options here. I can change how Workbench looks, some of the default options, where my workspaces are going to be saved by default. If you're using grid shift files, you can set your grid shift files here. Now finally, just going to circle all the way back around, I'm going to take this workspace and publish it to FME Server. So I simply enter the connection parameters for my FME Server installation. It connects to it. I have a number of repositories. Basically, repositories are folders where I can store my workspaces online. I'll create a new one here, database. I have the name of my workspace. It'll allow me to select any published parameters. If I have additional published parameters that I didn't want, I can unpublish them here as well. If there's any files that have to be uploaded in order for this translation to work, FME will try to identify them and add them here. If it misses some, you can add them. In this case, I have to add my Access database. Then I have the services which I can register this workspace against. Services are basically how FME Server will deal with the output of a translation. For the catalog service, the workspace itself is the output. This allows me to quickly download a workspace. The data download service will take the output of any translation, zip it up, and make it available for download. Useful if you're creating shape files, AutoCAD files, etc. It doesn't really apply when you're writing to a database. Data streaming will take the output of a translation and stream it directly back to your web browser. This is handy if your output is HTML files or PNG files, GIF images, PDF files, things like that. The job submitter simply runs the translation and then presents you with a log file. Because we're loading data into a database, that's our best bet for this one. We also have KML network link, advanced form of KML streaming, as well as OGC services, WFS, and WMS. So I'll publish this workspace. I can see in the log file that it was published successfully, and now I can go to my FME Server installation and take a look at this. So this is the FME Server web page. I can go to my job submitter service. Here's the different repositories. I created the database, misspelled, database. When I click on that, it lists the workspaces which I've published. I can then select the workspace, and anything which is a published parameter, I can now edit. So in this case, my source data set was a published parameter. This allows me to upload additional data. So I can change this. I will upload a different file, my area of interest. I can then upload that file to the FME server and then select the uploaded file. Now you may be wondering why I have to select the data twice. With some formats, what you upload and what you actually select for your translation will be different. For example, with shape files, you'll be uploading a large number of files, but then you have to select the specific shape file that you want to translate. Now I can run the translation, and this translation will run on the web server. This means that anyone who has AutoCAD files can run this translation without having FME Desktop installed in their own computer. So you can see the translation completed successfully. Okay, so we had a number of questions come in while I was going through this talk. Are templates available through the ArcGIS Data Interop extension? That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. If it's the data interoperability extension available from Esri themselves, probably not at this point. However, if you're using an extended FME, basically in FME, I go to the Start menu here. In FME Desktop, there's the administration tools, and you can use the integration console to extend FME into ArcGIS. In this case, I don't have ArcGIS installed, but I do have SQL Server installed. And then use that. You probably could use the templates. You may have to create a blank workspace to start with in order to do it, but that should be available, but I haven't tested it. A question came in. I had a hard time selecting multiple items in Workspace and then trying to move them as a group to some other location. There's a few things that you can do. If you're trying to select multiple items, holding down the Control key can help. And then when you click and drag, it'll move all of them. If you're going to be moving things often, once you've selected them, create a bookmark around them. There's my bookmark. This is my transformation. And now I can just move that bookmark around. So bookmarks are really handy for taking multiple items and moving them around your workspace. Now there's also another question about context menus. I don't use context menus very often, but there was an option that was mentioned to take a look at workspaces, to right-click on these and run in FME Workbench. Looks like we have removed that. The option to run it in the quick translator, that'll be basically the same. So you have Edit with Workbench, which will open it up in Workbench so you can edit it. If you simply want to run the workspace, then we run it with the quick translator. This used to be called the Universal Translator. The quick translator is probably the best way to quickly run a workspace. It simply opens up the quick translator here, and it will prompt you for your published parameters. So previously, running with Workbench with FME 2010, that's probably better served now in FME 2011 by using the quick translator. It'll give you the exact same functionality. Okay, that about covers everything which I wanted to go through. Thank you very much for watching this demonstration. If you have any more questions, please contact us at www.safe.com or contact the value-added reseller partner in your region. Thank you very much and have a good day.